Welcome to the show with your friend and mine. So tell me, Dr. Squee, who's it gonna be this time? We like to hear you talk, and we love to hear you listen. And if you are not subscribed, you won't know what you're missing. So welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Headphones up, here we go.
Hello and welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. I'm Dr. Squee, and this, as always, is my show. Just before I introduce tonight's guest, later on this week, we've got a double header on Thursday. First of all, at 6 p.m, I will be talking to the Lord Mayor of Cardiff. Being that my radio show now goes out on a Welsh radio station, yeah, that's happened now. So that's going to be lots of fun. Please do join us at 6 o'clock. Then at 8 o'clock, we have Greg Proops joining us for an interview. So please join us for both of those. But in the meantime, let's welcome tonight's guest. He is a writer, director, producer, musician. He does everything basically. But tonight, we're here to talk about something very special. So last time he was on the show, he mentioned an Audible audio drama which he had written, which was Getting Better, the fight for the NHS. And that instantly interested me. Not only is the NHS a wonderful thing that should be celebrated, but I'm currently working for the NHS myself. And I don't know, like the story is very hopeful, but I don't know after listening to it whether I should be hopeful or depressed by the parallels to today. But here to talk about that, and the story centers around the founding of the NHS and Nye Bevan. We're going to go all the way through it. Please welcome to the Dr. Squee Show, back to the show for like third, fourth time, whatever it is, Kenton Hall.
Hello, how are you? Always a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, you're becoming this sort of like Billy Connolly of this joint, like to my Parkinson.
Okay. I'm going to come up with some joke involving bikes, really launch my career into the stratosphere.
Oh, yeah. By the way, yeah, I don't know if you saw my message earlier. We are also, as part of the radio show this week, we're going to be celebrating Barry Cryer. They're now late. I can't even bring myself to say that without saying weird.
it's a terrible tragedy. And also, the wonderful Joe Kendall just passed away as well from that era of British comedy. I'll read that again. So yeah,
I think she might have even been on one of the pilots for
stuff. Weirdly, being a Canadian child, you wouldn't think I had quite such a grounding in 60s British comedy, considering I was born in 76. But my parents were both English. They didn't really share that kind of sort of love of it, but my dad did have a bunch of Goons records, so I kind of started with that. And I used to haunt bookshops looking for BBC used to release all their radio shows on cassette.
Yeah,
children, a cassette is a terrible, terrible medium that for some reason people used to put music on so that it could unravel in the backseat of your car. But I used to haunt Monroe's books on Government Street in Victoria, British Columbia. As a shout out they won't be expecting. I used to buy BBC audio collections, and one of them was I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again. I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue. So I was, despite being thousands of miles away, I was very much a fan of Barry Cryer and Joe Kendall and all the Python boys, all the Goodies boys. It was kind of my specialist subject when I was growing up. So it was very sad to read of Mr. Cryer's death and Miss Kendall's, because they were real inspirations to me as a writer and a performer.
Thank you very much for bringing up Joe there. I was remiss there. I mean, when I believe one of the pilot episodes of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, because they did, I think, a couple of pilots, and one of them I think had Joe Kendall on it.
Yeah, Joe Kendall was on along with John Cleese in the first series as well.
Yeah. Such great losses. And I think, like, I don't know if in this country, and this country, I think, was one of the biggest platforms for launching something like Audible. I don't think you get to that. You don't get to Big Finish if it wasn't for this great tradition of radio. And
absolutely.
There are very few which are as large in that world as Barry Cryer was.
Yeah, I still call it the wireless, despite the fact that that's entirely outside of my age range. And I mean, just because I grew up on all of those radio shows, Hancock's Half Hour, just used to have them on vinyl when I was a kid, and used to just listen to them endlessly. They were what I went to whenever I was. We've talked about this before, being myself being bipolar, but whenever I was in a depression, oftentimes the only thing I could find that was comforting was BBC radio programs on vinyl, unless I just to sit in my cocoon and just listen to the Goons, and I don't know, somehow knowing that Spike Milligan had sort of suffered some similar symptoms to me and was still able to find nonsense in the midst of it was a great comfort. So all of those things, I there's whole episodes of I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again that I could quote by rote. So it's but it was a friend of mine sent me through a Barry Cryer joke that he'd heard on the radio, which made me laugh. I hadn't heard this one before, and it was just so simple and so very classically Barry Cryer. And it's a knock knock joke, which is a knock knock, who's there? Granddad. Stop the funeral. And
and they had on
simple, and my children would call it a dad joke, but it's a perfectly constructed joke, and dad or no, it is testament to the man's continual ability, and he did it, and he remained at the absolute height of his powers for his entire life. I'm assuming his entire adult life, certainly. Perhaps he was a very funny baby. I don't know for certain.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a comedic performer that you can think of, he's either written for them, influenced them, or worked with them on stage. It's just that there's no one whose kind of work he didn't touch, certainly on the British comedy scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because he similar to Bob Monkhouse, I think the fact that he wrote jokes kind of in some ways to the humorless made him seem as though he was part of an older school than his contemporaries, but in reality he was as alternative and avant-garde as the rest of them. He was just a master craftsman, and that he was funny. That was the main thing. He was incredibly funny for his entire career, right up until his untimely passing. So yeah,
I think it's
very sad loss.
It's so easy for people to forget how kind of like still how do I put this, groundbreaking and still pushing boundaries. I'm Sorry, I haven't a clue was. Like, I mean, this was a joke, by the way. So if anyone, like when this on radio version, this is okay to tell. This went out on 6 o'clock or 6:30 or something like that on BBC Radio 4. So I think I'm on safe ground here.
Okay.
But like when they were doing the Oxbridge English Dictionary, which was like they'd come up with fake meanings for words. So it's like foreskin, to compel relatives. And just genius. Just and like, you know, you always like a bit, they said foreskin on Radio 4, like a drive time. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's just someone who could find the funny in just about anything. And I think that's really the meaning of life as far as I'm concerned. But then I am a comedy writer, so I am a little bit biased.
You see, this is the thing. I didn't feel, I thought it was the perfect matchup of guest with you and talking about that subject going into the getting better, the fight for the NHS, because this does such a wonderful job of mining the comedy as well as the kind of drama and everything that went into the NHS happening. Because, you know, when you hear the term Nye Bevan, like the name Nye Bevan, I think people just go, hey, he went out and he said, let's form the NHS. And indeed they did. And it wasn't quite.
And that's if they know the name at all, because we have a remarkably short memory for particularly political figures, unless they have committed entertaining misdeeds. You know, that tends to be the politicians that get remembered, the ones that either don't do their job or do their job so appallingly that the country is on fire when they left. So someone who actually accomplished something, and not alone. And that's part of the thing as well, is, you know, I know what you mentioned before, that sort of showing exactly what it took and how big of a fight that it was, but also how many people it took and how much cooperation it took and how easily people could band together in opposition of it as well. So I think that's one of the things with history. It is the old quote that people who, you know, forget history are doomed to repeat it. And one of the reasons why we sort of return to these stories, and it took no, you know, first off, all credit to my co-writer Paul Birch, who did some incredible work on the scripts as well, and Ian Haig, who sort of originated the project and came up with the first storyline, and of course my regular partner in crime, Barnaby Eaton Jones. everyone was, it was one of those projects where everyone was of the same mind, was that, but it took no grunt work whatsoever to make it relevant to modern times. That was not, it was not a case of like, oh, we're gonna underline this and we're gonna lean on that. It just was, that was just everything we researched, everything we looked up, every writer's sort of contributions to it went, you know, this kind of just is today, isn't it? And yeah, exactly.
Even more so now than, like, this was released mid last year, towards the end of last year.
August came out.
Yeah.
It was originally going to come out for the anniversary of the NHS, but you know, the nature of making anything means hitting dates hard doesn't necessarily always come to pass.
But it feels like everything that might have seemed relevant is even more so now than it was then. I mean,
yeah.
I you know, by the way, just to put this on Front Street, I'm going to try and be as little political as I can. However, some of these are historical facts. Other things just are. Anyway, look, we'll perhaps equally damn everyone.
Little political as I can, because I wear my politics embroidered on my sleeves and in a tattoo of a bleeding heart on my left arm. So you know what.
But I'm wearing this. I'm aware this is going out at 6 p.m. on radio tomorrow on drive time, and it's about that time now on the Monday right now. So I don't want to go to. But no. It's just the fact that. Right, I think if we damn everyone equally, we'll be on safe ground. So basically, at the time, you had a Labour Party in disarray who was fighting itself. You got the Conservatives who really just, a lot of the party didn't want the NHS to happen. And today, you've got a Labour Party in disarray, in a mess, and the Conservatives, some of which will say, do not want the NHS to be in its current format. I think that's all safe ground to say.
Yeah, and it's and of course it's very easy to I think one of the problems we have with politics and indeed public discourse today is that everything is painted in sort of broad left and right strokes, which just isn't the case. I mean, I would be suspicious of anyone that subscribed wholeheartedly to the political ideals of any given party, because political parties are by their nature compromised. And indeed, you know, some of the groundwork for the NHS, or at least the idea of the NHS, have been put in place by politicians from both parties over the years. Well, what it took, what Nye Bevan and the team surrounding him did, was to actually sort of pick up the ball and actually get it done, as opposed to just being a series of papers and ideas that were constantly compromised by the needs and wants of endless other parties, which is, you know, how politics tends to work. We only have to look now. It's always someone that's willing to take something that's potentially good from either party and then beat it into the ground with a mallet, because they've just thought of something completely unconnected that they'd like to get in there. It's strange, because I mean, being Canadian, I grew up with universal healthcare. But I also grew up with American television, in which, you know, on every medical show, everyone was going, oh, but it's going to be a gazillion pounds to get his leg x-rayed. I think maybe we may just have to cut it off instead. And I was like, what is going on? What is this weird dystopian world they live in down there, where people are going bankrupt for medical procedures? So, you know, and then I moved to the UK when I was 19. And obviously I've had great many sort of wrestling with mental health issues over the years, and physical health issues. And I'm one of the millions of people that can say with no doubt that without the NHS, I wouldn't be here. And that I probably wouldn't have made it under a non-universal healthcare system. So if you want to call that socialism, then, you know, I'm just going to start painting the rest of this room red.
I also love the fact that it seemed like Nye Bevan knew when was the right moment to compromise. So to begin with, he knew he had to be bloody minded to get this thing even considered. And it had to be the purest form of it in a paper to go forward, to then later, when he had to compromise. Like, he knew if he compromised too early, then you just get a watered down, nothing version of the bill, which is what was trying to be pushed through at the time. But he knew right at the end, it seemed, and I don't know how much of that was dramatic license or what, but it seemed like, it felt certainly from this version of the story, that he knew near the end, then he had to make compromises to make it happen.
Well, we stuck very close to the historical record. I think maybe once or twice things have been shuffled in terms of the order of things happening for dramatic impact. But I think those were very sort of last minute things of this scene would work better here. but because we felt quite strongly about placing the real life story alongside the fictional story of Eva and the hospital in Manchester. Although even that was drawn from stories from physicians at the time and a lot of historical research, and indeed Carol, who was our medical researcher, provided us endless number of stories from the period. So there was a lot of research that went into it. But I think that's the nature. I mean, the thing is, Nye Bevan was a politician, and he was a flawed human being, as 100% of human beings are. And I think that only makes his achievements more impressive, because not only competing against the needs of the doctors and unions and political parties, but also against Nye Bevan. His own worst instincts, his own sort of desire to be liked, to have some degree of influence and power, his own relationships with people, his own personality and style. And I think that's kind of what made it interesting, is that he's a fascinating character who played a huge part in achieving something that saved millions of lives.
Yeah. It really occurred to me as well that it seemed like not a coincidence that he was Welsh. Like coming from a mining town, and he had those experiences in the mine himself. He'd seen people who their day-to-day job involves people getting sick, pretty much, and they were some of the areas worst hit. And back then, as now, unfortunately, money doesn't travel evenly throughout the UK. And again, I'm not trying to get political; just it's a fact. And they're some of the towns who had some of the biggest problems with healthcare, because they were getting things like black lung from breathing coal every day, from mine collapses. They were getting injured, and you had to make a decision between saving someone's leg and making rent. Do you think that his Welshness played a key part?
I mean, I certainly think that there is. It's not for a non-Welsh person to comment on the Welsh national character, but it's certainly the Celtic peoples do seem to have a fire in their bellies that sometimes their English neighbours lack. Although some of my best friends are Englishmen. I think the thing is what's interesting, and I think you hit on a really important point, and the reason why sort of dramas like this are important, is that the problem with social strata, politics, all around the world, it comes from sort of one thing. It's not that money and power and sort of birth to a certain financial status or class or whatever is necessarily in and of itself morally wrong. It's that it insulates you from what ordinary people are going through. And insulation from the actual human experience of the average person is what causes so many of the social problems that we see. Yeah. If the politicians involved genuinely have never been emotionally impacted by the experiences of the vast majority of their constituents, then they're constitutionally unable to truly act in their best interests. And it doesn't mean that they have to experience personal, but they have to be emotionally and personally impacted in some way. And that can be done by sort of building your empathy and putting yourself in the position where you actually get to know people. You don't have to, it's like this whole thing about sort of does an artist have to struggle? No, but they do have to understand struggle. And that is by putting yourself in personal contact with the widest group of people. As a complete aside, that's also the reason why diversity is important. That's what everything comes down to, is genuine human connection. And I do think that the garrulous sort of nature of Nye Bevan, that in some respects may have come from the sort of culture and community that he grew up in. And I certainly don't think the Welsh are sort of alone in producing that kind of community, but certainly they are known for it. Meant that I think that he was genuinely interested in people. I think he was also genuinely interested in people liking him, but like that's not sort of condition that doesn't sort of recur through history. But I think he was genuinely interested in people, and a genuine interest in people, and allowing that guard to drop and getting to know people makes for someone who will push past what are basically sort of theoretical objections, because human interest trumps any theoretical objection if you really believe it and understand it. You know, you can say, oh, well, if you kill this one person, 1,000,000 people will live, but you have that one person in front of you. That argument isn't theoretical anymore. It's very, very different. And I think it causes people to think on a moral basis in a very different way. And I think that's the people that Nye Bevan was surrounded with and who worked with him were all, to a greater or lesser extent, of that mind, that once you can actually picture someone as a human being who feels the way you do and has the same inner life that you do, it is very, very difficult to screw them over. And I think it's purely insulation from that creates the kind of politicians that we see in power today.
Yeah, I think we've seen it time and time again when you get politicians who vote a certain way when everything's theoretical. Like you mentioned LGBTQ kind of struggles. And in America, it seems to happen a lot that these right-wing politicians vote against them until their son or daughter comes out as gay or transgender or anything else. And then suddenly it's a personal issue, and then they're forced to change. And it's so sad it takes that.
And I think that, okay, it's good that motivated change, but I think as a race, the only way we can truly evolve is we can move that to the next remove, is that if we can imagine anyone's son or daughter being affected by something, then we can see it as the right thing to do. It's the next step along. It's about the growth of empathy, and we all go through it in our lives. When I was 20, I was a nightmare. I believed largely the same things that I believe now. I was sort of autodidact, self-educated, incredibly well read, but I was and crazy as anything. I can say that. It's my word.
Autodidact.
But I was also 20, which meant that I was self-involved, self-insulated, concerned largely with how all of these issues affected how I felt. But as I've gotten older, increased experience of other people, really being motivated partially by parenting. So it's the same thing, to actually see things from other people's point of view. I hope that I've been able to evolve as a person who can think genuinely from another person's perspective, which is very useful as a writer, but it's also very useful in becoming a better human being. And I think you can get there, and it doesn't matter where you start from. You can get there, but it's baked into not just sort of theoretically sort of wanting other people to be sort of generally well, but to really understand that the people that we talk about when we talk about news or people being affected by disaster or COVID or any of the issues that we see in the news have exactly the same depth and level of inner life and consciousness than we do. And that when we talk about them being affected by something, being ill, being stressed with money issues, this obviously plays a big part through getting better. If you can really imagine what your life, everyday life and your internal life would be like if those things were happening to you, then you can't allow the things that allow. You can't, because it's all right. Oh, they're depressed. But if you'd ever felt depression, you wouldn't be able to treat it in that way. And I think with the NHS, they always talk about, getting the most value out of it. And there's lots of ways in which it could run better. It's a large, unwieldy organization. It can always do with improvements. But when they talk about it purely as a business, they've missed the point of it.
Yeah.
And the NHS has lots wrong with it, but at its beating heart is the desire to keep hearts beating, frankly. So, my daughter is starting to be immersed. She's in her second year, so she's working in NHS hospitals all the time. And it's been fascinating, particularly after having written Get It Better, to hear what it's like on the inside. And I've done a lot of work in hospitals as well with teaching sort of writing and such with on mental health wards. Yeah, and I think the team that created the scripts that became Getting Better, Ian, who's the producer and who sort of started the whole project, he works in the NHS, and I know that Barnaby and Paul and I are all very sort of big supporters of the NHS and bringing those very different perspectives to it as well. All the things that we've experienced and the way that it's affected our lives and our family members over time. So yeah, I was just really honored to be part of the writing team on it and to bring my, in a lot of ways, my sort of comedic vision to it as well. Although, you know, some of the best jokes, Paul's as well. So
it is a script just dripping with both empathy and comedy. One thing which I was very interested in is the fact that you got Rhod Gilbert playing Nye Bevan. Now, he's not someone I would have in a million years have thought for the role, but he seems so perfect. I think his natural bent towards some sort of ire at the world, which he wants to see do better, seems a perfect fit for this role. How did you come to cast him?
I mean, Barnaby and Ian leading the casting, although I was sort of privileged to be kept abreast of it at times and be able to chuck some names into the mix. I wish I could take credit for having thought of Rhod, because it was a masterstroke. And I don't. Again, I think you're right. It's like, just because you know, you're dealing with Audible and names are getting thrown back and forth, and because Rhod is sort of, his background hasn't been in drama. His name came up. One of the team just occurred to suddenly. Rhod's name popped into the conversation, and from that point on, everyone was like, "Yeah, obviously." And we only found out after those conversations that Nye Bevan is one of Rhod's absolute heroes. So for him, it was a personal mission. And I know that he, you know, so adamant about getting it right and doing justice. And my God, he did more than justice. He's phenomenal in it. I love it. This is the one thing I like about film and radio projects, is you can offer genuine praise to something you had a hand in because someone else did the work and elevated everything to another level. So yeah, the performances I can praise because I didn't do that.
Well, let's just talk as two fans of this production then for a second, because geez, I mean, it seems the obvious way to go was someone who can give a heartfelt, like a speech on the level of kind of tears and sadness, you know, that end of the spectrum, if you will. Whereas his kind of ire just conveyed the same thing in a different way. And I think it was appropriate to this role. I'm not saying that he didn't nail the other scenes, but that's what I got the most from his performance, was just how kind of like passionate he was, how weary he felt. It oozed throughout the performance, as it does in his stand-up so naturally.
Yeah.
It was just so good. Sorry.
Oh no, it's.
I know that's not a question, but yeah,
it's yeah. I do think that there is a reason why you know, a lot of comics and stand-ups across all mediums end up doing very well in dramatic roles, and that's because it requires a sort of fearlessness to be to bring a three-dimensional character to life. And I think it's like comedy is much harder than drama, much harder. Because particularly comic acting, because it requires you to do all of the things that a purely dramatic actor does in terms of embodying the character, the emotional sort of experiences of the character, but then you have to be able to time jokes on top of that as well. So, and you know, my experience, the vast majority of people can't time jokes, and thank God, because otherwise I'd be out of work. There's an awful lot of people think they're funny. And I'm sure they're lovely people in many other ways, and I wish them well, in both real and theoretical terms. But the timing that Rhod has, he could apply it equally to a punchline in one of the scenes and a really cutting remark, or just a punch to the gut. And it's all about finding the moment and looking for the opportunity, and that's something that comics do particularly well. I've never had the guts to try stand up because I'd love to, but I haven't put in the 10,000 hours yet. So, but Rhod has, and yeah, just phenomenal performance. I was gobsmacked when I heard it, and like, Eva, you'd hear words that you'd written yourself, and it was like hearing it afresh, just because he'd run with it,
Yeah.
But one of the worst things about the performances in this, it's like, I mean, this sounds like really good, and Paul and I sound like geniuses, but I don't feel like maybe our material has been elevated by these incredible actors that have come in.
No, it is definitely both in this case. This was just so tightly written and so tightly performed. I mean, just to give anyone, in case you're not already appetite whetted for this yet, you've got Annette Badland, Louise Jameson, Mike Wozniak, Clive Mantle, Terry Malloy, Nina Anwar, Colin Baker, Neve McIntosh, and Mark Gatiss. And that's just a handful of the amazing names in this. I mean, Mark Gatiss is one I wanted to talk about as well, because, geez, he is so good at playing a total ass who then has this other level to it, though. Like, and that has to be there in the writing and the performance. Just, I don't know. It was just so magical to hear.
You know a little bit about my tastes in things, and I'm sure you'd be highly unsurprised to learn that the sound of Mark Gatiss reading words I had a hand in made me feel funny in my special areas.
Yeah.
And obviously Colin, which is a complete accent. I've worked with Colin before. He narrated my first feature film that I directed, and this was
now available on Netflix. A Dozen Summers.
Now available on Netflix. A Dozen Summers. And it was a complete coincidence. It was just there's so many people hold Colin in high regard. I mean, in fact, I think he discovered that I'd co-written the script on the recording day, just because. I mean, I'd enthusiastically, when they suggested him for the role, goes, yes, cast Colin and everything, because Colin is one of my favorite people on the planet. He's just great fun to be around and always delivers, and as far as I'm concerned, should be as big a star as any of the other actors that have worn the mantle of the Doctor. He's just an utter charmer, and
I guess I love their characters, and yeah, Colin's a very good example of it as well. There are characters who may be very against our political views and may have had some very harsh views, but you found a way of showing the humanity and showing that just because they think differently doesn't mean they don't care about people and their healthcare. Like Mark was playing this doctor who is the archetype, it seemed, for all the old school doctors. And there's a reason why they wanted slow and steady, because that protected people. They were worried if they roll the dice on this universal healthcare, it will mean the standard of cares will go down. They didn't just disagree with it for the sake of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and this continues today, a lot of thinking about your own patch, about being locked into a particular view set, and that happens on both sides of the imaginary aisle. People thinking about their corner of the sky, people genuinely having strongly held what some people might see to be short-sighted or incorrect views. And sometimes it takes a lot to see a person past a set of ideals or beliefs that we absolutely abhor. But I think even if you can never sort of see eye to eye with someone, if you don't acknowledge their humanity, then we absolutely can't move forward, because then it's just creating another set of barriers. Doesn't mean you have to agree with someone, doesn't mean you're ever going to be friends with someone that really holds a view that you can't stand, but you do have to acknowledge their humanity, or otherwise we learn nothing. I think it's every piece of public discourse at the moment. I have constructed a whole new way of conducting public discourse, and I will never get to trial it because it's too all encompassing. But this is what I've decided, is that because what's happened in general public discourse is that the people who have been abused and oppressed and not given their due human rights had to fight their own corner, which is unfair. They shouldn't have to keep explaining themselves and fighting for their own rights. And obviously they're going to be angry and hurt, and they're going to come out swinging. Completely understandable. Therefore, I think that every sort of different package of human rights that has not been lived up to should be put in a big tombola and assigned to a different group of people. Like, I think all straight Mexican men should now have to fight for the rights of lesbian women across the world. I think that lesbian women should be given the rights of, I don't know, some sort of mine workers, perhaps in Wales.
Just quick question. Sorry. They were particularly Mexican gay men.
The
lesbians, are they from any particular country? I'm just trying to get the map of this.
I'm just trying to make sure that every country gets it has to be a straight Mexican man, because the gay Mexican men obviously will have other things that they need to do, and I'm going to assign them somewhere else. Okay, but I just think it should be divided up equally, because I think everyone should be made to spend time with people and lives that are so completely outside their everyday experience.
Yeah.
And I think if they were assigned the job of, right, you need to make sure that these people are getting a fair shake at life and their human rights, and it doesn't impinge on your human rights at all, I think you'd be able to see it if it was just, look, does that seem fair? Also, it's your job, fix it. Now, everyone has to go out and fix somebody else's lack of rights. That's my new world order that I'm proposing.
Can I work on the religious leaders of the Middle East so I can give the sheikhs a sheik? The sheikhs a sheikh. Ah, damn it. I almost nailed that joke. Damn it. I mean, it wasn't that good, but at least I could have got it the right way around.
Don't drag my new world order down into your shoddy wordplay.
Which I even got the wrong order.
Basically, what I'm saying is, if I ruled the world, every idea I would have would be completely untenable and unrealistic. So it's for the best that I remain a comic writer and amateur philosopher. But that's the way I think it should go.
I've drawn a graph. It didn't come out pretty.
No, it'd be fun, but I'm working on it. If I ever get the opportunity, that's the way it's going to go. We should be fighting for it's all serious. We should be fighting for each other's rights.
We should.
Because it's the right thing to do. And not simply because it's something that's affected us personally. We should all be in the fight. We should stop drawing up lines and putting in groups. I mean, for God's sake, the current public discourse has got women and gay men fighting trans people, and I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? What is wrong with, like, why are natural allies, people who have experienced depression, people who have experienced people not understanding their actual life experiences and their identity, are now fighting against other people going through a very similar thing? It's like, that's how stupid the world has become. Individually, I love human beings, and everyone I meet has something I find interesting. As a mass, it's a hot mess. It's just a hot garbage fire. The human race collectively is trash. Individually, beautiful, wondrous, creative, unique creatures, but together, don't know why. It's like the worst kind of transformer. It changes from an angel into a garbage fire.
Yeah, we are better individually sometimes than in crowds.
Yeah, that's right.
It is true.
But then every so often, a crowd will surprise you as well. So that's what we keep hoping for.
Be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Getting back to this story, though, one thing I did absolutely love, and I assume that this seems like certainly it would have been a true part of the story. It seemed like the groundswell happened as well, that when they were struggling to get the doctors on board, they then turned to the females of the NHS, or to the females of what would become the NHS, to the nurses, to the carers, to the female doctors, as few of them, unfortunately, as there were at the time. Can you speak maybe a bit to that side of the story and the research on that?
It's always an interesting one. I can't speak for Paul on this, but it's always interesting. It's always interesting and challenging writing about female experiences, particularly in times when there are some very sort of immediate and obvious problems. I mean, there are immediate and obvious problems now, but obviously some progress has been made. So we're stepping back to when even less progress had been made in terms of equality. And I think as a writer, you do have to rely on lived experience of other people. You have to really dig deep and listen to what women have told us in the past and are telling us now about how they feel and how they've experienced those. But then also sort of the challenge as well when you're writing about the past, and you are very motivated to create strong female characters, is having to acknowledge the positions that they found themselves in. It would be very tempting to make Eva, for instance, the best doctor in the world, and just because you want to see, whereas again what she needs to be is a three-dimensional flawed human being who in a great many cases is unfairly penalized simply for the act of being a woman. And that's what's resonating is that women being penalized for being women, which is so ludicrous when you say it out loud. Yes, it's the sort of base tenet of all our sort of gender inequality in this society. But you know, you want to recognize that the power of women in society that they've always had been kept from exercising, and the importance that they played in the creation of the NHS. Jenny, Nye Bevan's wife Jenny, who was also an MP and incredibly important in the whole process, and had a stunning career of her own, completely separate to her husband's, as it should be. But at the same time, you don't want to make it look like it's sort of some kind of, and then the women came in and saved it all, because that would look as though you're trying to make a point. It would undermine the point, because it would look like you're making it up, which we weren't. You know, women have always, because they've unfairly been sidelined into purely sort of domestic, particularly in that era, that was starting to break out, that meant that, you know, what they could sort of have influence over was some of the most important things in life, which was the reality of home life, the reality of health, the reality of what people needed and care. And it's not that these are, like some people try to make out, as though those are traditionally feminine qualities. It was just they're traditionally human qualities that they were, for the wrong reasons, being given the time to exercise. And if everyone had been exercising them, we wouldn't have had half the troubles that we did. So yeah, it's finding that balance and trying to tell the whole story of the problems, but also the small wins that people had. And I always find it very challenging to write female characters in any other way than the women that I know, which is strong, independent, creative women. That's who I'm surrounded by, and the world is full of. So I don't know many sort of traditional housewives that don't have any sort of identity outside of that, and there's nothing wrong with it if that is the identity they've chosen. So trying to write sort of women in the 50s as being strong, three-dimensional, you have to remember, it's like, no matter what circumstance anyone finds themselves in, that there is a conscious human being at the back end of it. And it's just like every writer, you rely on other people's experiences because you need to try to be empathetic, but you have to acknowledge that you haven't had that experience, and therefore you need to really listen and pay attention to what other people's experiences have been. And you'll always learn something, and you'll have a lot of your ideas turned on their heads, and that's good. That's what everybody needs.
It's something maddening, but seems so true of the time, that women were brought up in these archetypes of being the carers, the nurturers, the ones who have raised the family, and nurses, and a lot of things in the in the caring industry. However, when it became to decision making, suddenly it would be the men who would take the forefront. So it seems very believable, and I believe this is one of the parts, as I say, you took from real experiences. Was it was so critical to get the women of the NHS, or what would become the NHS, involved in making it happen.
Yeah, it's the ludicrous nature of the way in which sort of society was conducted in those times, is that women made 1,000 life-changing decisions every day. And then when it came to the larger world, men would stroll in and make one, and they wouldn't always get it right. So it's like, yeah, that's superiority. Well done. And it's wrapping your head around the fact that women did incredible things in the roles in which they were forced into, those archetypes. Yeah. I think that is testament to the individual women involved, and the fact that, because of the fact that you shouldn't have had to be a homemaker. You shouldn't have had to stay out of politics or religion, whatever your interest and your calling was. You shouldn't have been had to be restricted to these set of choices. Nonetheless, the women that were sort of thrust into those archetypes did incredible things within them because they were incredible people. And that's always hard to wrestle with, because you want to present the way the field of options that women are entitled to, and yet when you're writing about the past, you have to just have to present, well, what did these real three-dimensional people who lived full lives do despite the fact that their options were limited?
When I don't know, I've got this completely the wrong way around to ask you this now, but when did the story first come to you, or when did you first kind of have the idea of this was the story to tell now?
I mean, it was Ian Haig who came to Barnaby with the idea first, and they'd been developing it for a while, largely with the view of the sort of upcoming anniversary of the NHS last year, and I was brought aboard and Paul as writers to kind of develop it from there, and we all were able to contribute characters and situations and the way in which the story played out as we went along. And I think Paul and I were probably chosen as writers because we'd done other work with either Ian or Barnaby, where we'd sort of been able to tackle a multitude of tones within. Paul writes some incredible theatre as well, and has written far more than I have. But I mean, my favorite types of projects are ones that combine comedy and drama, because that's what life is. And I like to work between tones. I like to surf that wave. So yeah, I was brought onto this project, and I was very honored to be so, because I fell in love with the world and the characters. I mean, I knew a lot of the story. I mean, one of my sort of specialist subjects, just out of interest, is sort of like World War II and the aftermath thereof in Britain, just because I've read a lot about it. So I kind of knew the beginnings of sort of Nye Bevan's story, but it gave me a real opportunity to kind of dig deep. I read Jenny Lee's book on about my life with Nye, and I had written a play about Winston Churchill previously as well, based on Winston Churchill's doctor's diaries. So I had sort of done a lot of research for that side of things too. Again, I can't speak for my co-conspirators, but I knew that it felt right to me when the project fell across my desk. It's other than most things where they go, "Will you write this and we'll pay you?" do feel slightly tingly to me, but this one felt like a good fit for me, and I'm hoping that the reason sort of it was brought to me was because I felt like a good fit for it. So yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the one thing that the COVID situation and lockdown reminded us of is something we should have been painfully aware of all the way along. Some of us have, I think, been more so than others, of how vital the NHS is. So having this story come out going off the back of that time, and it sounds like that time might have been coincidental, just made it all the more powerful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, with anything like this project, you wish you didn't have to write it. Like, or you wish that you could have written it as a purely celebratory piece of look at this wonderful thing that was accomplished, and hasn't life been grand ever since? But it's as much a warning as it is a celebration of what was achieved then. That if we forget what it took to get this, or how whatever flaws the NHS have, the utter good fortune we have to be born or move somewhere where it exists by comparison to other countries and other places in the world. And there are other places that have universal healthcare, which is wonderful. I come from one of them, but it's certainly owes a huge debt to the NHS as a model for it. So the NHS there are a great many things that, as having adopted Britain as my homeland, have made me feel ashamed, but the NHS is not one of them. The NHS is something that I am proud to support, and I am beyond proud that my daughter has gotten into as a career. There's a lot of things wrong with these scepter dials that occasionally make me just wrap myself in a Canadian flag, and then I remember what's wrong with my country, and then I take the flag off altogether. But the NHS is a testament to the fact that idealistic projects that are based in genuine care for humanity can be brought to fruition, but because of the nature of the world we live in, they need constant vigilance to keep them running.
Yeah.
And in reality, if the show does anything, it is just to remind us in this day and age what the core value of the NHS was and is and should be. Because when things grow, that's people always talk about idealistic ideas and then they fall apart because humans are involved, and that's true. But that means we have to constantly revisit them, constantly remind ourselves of the ideals behind them, and make changes based on the core values that originated the thing in the first place. You can't revise the NHS to work better if you don't remember why we made it in the first place.
Very true.
And I think that's if getting better does have any sort of real world impact for people listening to it, it's to go back to those core values and think about how do we move forward with that in mind. Obviously, at its heart, the best we hope for is going to be an entertaining drama that moves people, makes people think, and that's really what fiction is for. It's to make people think and lodge a little nugget of emotional truth into their brains while they're driving in their car or sitting on a train or anywhere else where they might earphone up and take in a audio drama.
And after having written or co-written this and gone this journey with the story, does it make you more hopeful or less hopeful that we could have another Nye Bevan, that we could have another one of these pivotal moments to bring the NHS forward for another how many years?
The thing I hope for, and the jury is very much still out, is that we don't have another Nye Bevan, is that we eventually realize that we're all Nye Bevan, and that we all have the possibility to be Nye Bevan. I think there have been hugely influential people throughout history, but I think if you wait around for a Messiah and you'll be waiting a long time. The people who've been influential, it's been an accident of someone getting fed up and going, well, if nobody else is going to do it, because they've got the chutzpah and cojones. See, I've covered many different cultural and language.
They've got the chutonies.
And to do it. But we all need to do it. We all need to be Nye Bevan. So each individual listener should be inspired to stand up and do something. But we all need to do it together. It's such a fractured world that it's kind of only in unity, despite my previously stated disposition towards humanity en masse, that we need to change my mind that humanity en masse isn't a dumpster fire. That's what I'm asking through this project. Change my mind. I mean, obviously not that anyone cares what I think, but in my own little world, that's what happens, is that...
I care, Kenton.
Oh, thank you. It's good to know somebody cares.
The other thing I want to ask is, because to me, as I say, this was a very inspiring story to hear. So well written, so well acted. having been involved in this, having written on it yourself and worked with the other very talented writers, and this, heard your work brought to life by this cast, how inspirational is it to go into future art after working on this?
I absolutely love the piece, and I really hope that it continues to gather listeners. If you're an Audible member, it's not going to cost you anything extra. Go and listen to it immediately. It is funny and it is entertaining, and it's not a dry piece at all.
No.
But the most inspiring thing, and I think the thing that's led to this project, is that after 20 odd years of scrabbling away, sort of repurposing my life's career from musician to prose radio and television writer, is the fact that I keep being so lucky is to run up against collaborators of a like mind, who are inspired by the same things. I had it in music, and then I've had it again in the last few years with people like Barnaby and Ian and Paul and Jack Bowman, who was an exec on Getting Better. Just people who care about story and care about the things that I do, and that inspires me for the future. I've been very, very lucky because I've been on projects where you haven't had as pleasant an experience, or you haven't had people that have been as professional as you'd like or as kind as you'd like. But the reason why Getting Better came together that it did is because people cared about it. People wanted it to be something that was inspirational to themselves as much as to an audience, something that would be a positive force and explore things that needed exploring. I think there's a little bit of fear when you go from a project that you really enjoyed to the next thing in the hopes that it's not going to be dreadful and a terrible time working on it because you've just had a really good experience. But knowing that this is the kind of thing that I can take part in, and I have been invited to take part in, that gives me some faith in the future that that's the kind of projects that I'd like to be involved in, and that I hope that there's more projects with that kind of sort of empathy at their heart in my future.
Yeah, I mean, I just heard this, and it was one which I knew I had to talk about and proselytized out to other people. And having to know the writer was quite handy as well, or one of the writers. I know you're quick to point that out, but there was two others.
Absolutely. I'm very, very proud of my work on it, but I'm also incredibly proud of the people I worked with. So.
Yeah, it was just one I really wanted to talk about. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's on Audible now. It's 9 episodes, if I'm remembering correctly.
10
episodes, sorry. Roughly about 45 minutes. But what I do love about these Audible series, the same as I love about Netflix, is you can make episodes as long as they need to be. They're not set on a fixed structure. It's the story is king, which is just so wonderful about these things.
Yeah, no, I think that's really I think that's been a big boon for storytelling as a whole. That shift of not having to make each chunk of your story fit a framework that it's not necessarily built for. This is good for me because I'm a terrible framework writer. I hate writing to restrictions, but that's more about my personality than anything else.
Guys, please do go to Audible now. Check it out. You'll love it. Like if you're anything like me, you'll just tear through it in a weekend. I did this weekend just gone. It was just an amazing work. Thank you very much for bringing it into the world, Kenton, or at least being part of bringing it into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a willing midwife.
Again, I'm just adding that for you because I know you'll want to shout out the other writers and stuff.
Yes,
you did amazingly. It's such wonderful work. Guys, please do tune into the radio version of this tomorrow at 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Drive Home with the Dr. Squee Show, where you'll have loads of music and songs in amongst this interview. Kenton, what would you like to hear along with this interview? Our theme of the week's comedy songs, or like songs which make you smile. But
do you know what? I've been thinking about it all interview, which is why I've talked such nonsense. But you know what? I'm going to pick my favorite artist and the perfect song for what we've been talking about. Elvis Costello and the Attractions. What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?
Here we go.
Got funny, got peace, got love, got understanding. What more do you want?
Great. If you're watching the video right now, thank you very much for watching. By the way, I need to re-record the end credits of this because they still say the Bear.life, which is a now dead radio station, as much as we loved it. So Tune into sw20radio.co.uk. There's an app. Just check it out. Watch tomorrow. I've been Dr. Squee. With me has been Kenton Hall.
Hello. Goodbye.
I can point the right direction without reversing me. I've been Dr. Squee. That was my show. And in a world where you can literally be anything, please be kind.
Exactly.